So welcome to the Pro-Social Virtual Seminar Series, the second episode. We're very happy that you're here. The organizers are Maya Adena. She's the head of the research group Information, Incentives and Inequality at WZB and professor of applied microeconomics at TU Berlin. I'm the co-head of the research unit Environment and Resources at RWI, Leibniz-Institut for Economic Research, and head of the research group Pro-Social Behavior at RWI, and professor of behavioral and environmental economics at the Ruhr University Bochum. The background of the seminar is the Pro-Social project, which I will briefly introduce on the next slide. And we together developed the idea for the virtual seminar series, and our aim is to foster exchange between researchers studying pro-social behavior. The format is that we meet every second Tuesday of each month from 2:30 to 3:30 Central European time, and hope that it fits Europeans, but also our colleagues in Asia and also the US or America. We normally have a 5-minute introduction, 40 minutes presentation, and then 50 minutes question and answer. The question and answer will not be recorded, and we plan to upload the videos of the seminar series on YouTube. In March, there will be Nathalie Seebans presenting. She's a cognitive psychologist, and we're looking forward to it already. If you want to get reminders that the seminar series is, please join the email list. You can just send an email to this email address that you would like to be on the list. And as I said, the YouTube videos will be uploaded. The Pro-Social project, very briefly, is funded by the Leibniz Cooperative Excellence. Funding is around €1 million. And I'm the speaker of the project. So if you have comments or questions regarding the project, please contact us. Our aim is to identify and testing scalable measures that motivate people to engage in various forms of pro-social behavior, such as donating money, organs, blood, volunteering, or environmental friendly behavior. So across the context, and the methods are the review of reviews, theoretic model survey experiments, and coordinated field experiments. This is the overview of principal investigators: Maya and Steffen from WZB, Andreas Lange from the University of Hamburg, Isabel Thiemann, Max Planck Institute, Igor Roswald from the University of Waterloo, Nathalie Seebans from the Central European University. These three are also psychologists, so both the project and also the seminar series has a focus on behavioral economics, but is also interdisciplinary. And Nathalie and René will also present in the series. René Becker from Freie Universität Amsterdam is a sociologist, and Stefania and Lorenz are Ninos are behavioral economists. Yeah, now I hand over to Maya.
Okay, so it is my real pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Roland Bénabou. And Roland is professor at Princeton University and holds a PhD from MIT. His work bridges microeconomics and macroeconomics. He's basically a figure in behavioral economics and political economy. Now, within behavioral economics, his research focuses on the interplay of extrinsic and intrinsic motivations, the determinants of prosocial behavior, to which speak very much to our project, and also to motivated beliefs. And his work has been very influential in economics, which is reflected in many honors and appointments that he holds. So among others, he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the Econometric Society, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And in 2021, he received the Jean-Jacques Lafon Prize, and he has also served on the editorial boards of major journals in economics, was also a co-editor of the American Economic Review. And I would like to mention two of his very important papers, so both co-authors with Jean Tirole, but they are especially important for our research on prosociality. So the first seminal paper is entitled Incentives and Prosocial Behavior and was published in 2006 in American Economic Review. In this paper, Roland analyzes how material and reputational incentives interact when people act for the benefit of others. Now, the key insights are that extrinsic incentives can basically spoil the reputational value of good deeds. Now, paying or publicly rewarding people can create doubt about whether their actions are done for money or actually done from genuine concern. And this generates the well-known crowding out effect and has important implications regarding how charities, firms, and governments should design incentives. The second paper mentioned here, entitled Intrinsic and Extrinsic Motivation, published in 2003 in the Review of Economic Studies, basically provides the cognitive and signaling foundations that underpin the phenomena which were analyzed in the 2006 paper. So I very much welcome Roland Bénabou today to our seminar. But before going forward, let me quickly explain the rules for our seminar. So during the presentation that is going to be recorded, we only ask you to ask clarification questions, but basically not ask, but write them in the chat, and we will basically ask Roland to clarify if needed. Now, please wait with the major questions to the Q&A, which will be after the presentation and will no longer be recorded. Okay, so hopefully we can start in a minute. Thank you very much, and yes, we are also looking to see you at the future editions.
So thank you very much for the invitation. This is clearly a great project that you're all running, and so I'm happy to talk to you about some of the work, and in particular a paper with Armin Falk and Luca Henkel. Okay, so apologies for this. So this is an experimental paper, and just to make it more lively and fun, I'm going to flash on the next screen a QR code, and if you would like, you could scan it with your phones, and then you'll be able to answer the I think 6 questions that the experiment subjects are answering. Of course, they're answering them for real stakes, but I think it'd be interesting to see what people think, just like that. So here's the QR code. It should take you to this site menti.com, and then there's an arrow that says next or start, and then I will show the QR code again when I start with the questions. Okay. All right. So in most of the literature on social preferences and pro-social behavior, people face what we call a self versus other trade-off. How much should I give in a dictator game or to charity? How much should I reciprocate? How much should I contribute to a public good? And so on. And there's obviously a large literature on this, and we understand relatively well how people behave, both the heterogeneity, the role of image, and other considerations. And even more fundamentally, the question of what is the right thing to do in this context has a fairly clear answer. You're supposed to, if you are acting morally, to contribute at least something to the public good, to the charity, to the recipient. You're supposed to reciprocate, and so on. In this
Roland?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Now you changed the slides. Okay, I thought that was wrong.
No. Here we're interested in a different type of question about social behavior, in which the answer is much less clear. And these are dilemmas where the ends and the means are in conflict. And I will give you examples, but the most famous one is the trolley dilemma, which I'm sure you all know. And in this case, there are two principles as to, what one should do or what is the right thing to do. One is consequentialism. It should be based on, maximizing the consequences and general welfare. And the other one is deontological ethic. An action is permissible or impermissible based on the act itself under a series of rules, independent of consequences. And the tradition obviously goes back to Kant and the categorical imperative, to which I will come back. In economics, whether it's models or empirics, agents are almost always assumed to make decisions as consequentialists. Policymakers do cost-benefit analysis, social welfare function are also consequentialist. But the question I want to ask here is this always the right way to understand people's moral preferences? So we're going to ask the following questions experimentally. First of all, how prevalent is consequentialist behavior versus deontological behavior when, the two principles conflict, when the ends and the means are in opposition? So we're going to ask over a set of tasks whether a significant fraction of people choose non-consequential options, deontological options. After having documented that, in fact, yes, there's a significant minority, but a significant number of decisions that are not consequentialist and accord more with deontological logic, we're going to ask whether both of these types of choice reflect stable traits or preference types, like risk aversion or altruism or, time preference, etc. And to assess that, we're going to look at whether the behavior, consequentialist or deontological choices, is consistent across different situations that involve a tension between the two principles. And finally, we're going to ask, to what extent are consequentialist and deontological preferences or decisions related to the standard pro-social preferences that I discussed before, self versus others, using standard games. So our strategy, there's a very basic model, which I can show you at the end if you're interested, but I'm going to skip for now, is going to rely on designing what we call EVM, ends versus means decision situation that induce a tension between the two modes of reasoning. We're going to start with the trolley dilemma because it's unavoidable in this literature. It looms very large. Our innovation in this case is to make it not unrealistic and hypothetical about a trolley on the train track, etc., but it's going to be about saving real lives with real stakes. Then we're going to design 5 other ends versus means games that pit the two moral principles against each other. And in 4 of them, the consequences are always going to be the same. One consequence is that 15 euros goes to a donation as a donation to a charity that helps children with cancer. The other one is that 2 euros goes to a random subject. In terms of ranking these consequences, almost all the subjects, 95%, judge that the first one is preferable. And if there is no conflict with some other moral principle, the right thing to do is to donate to the charity. But we're going to design situations in which, in order to implement the donation to the charity, you have to violate some moral rule or some deontological imperative. For example, you have to lie, you have to bribe somebody, you have to act non-consequentially in different ways that I will describe. So that's what we call the main block of experiments. And then we complement it with the standard self versus other decision situations. And finally, we also administer questionnaires from the moral psychology literature, which among which are questionnaires that kind of look at things like the trolley behavior, willingness to cause harm to others in order to achieve a greater good. So what guides us in designing these situations? Well, we go back in some sense to Kant, and we look at 4 or 5 instantiation of the categorical imperative that tell us, what one should never do or what one should always do. The first one is killing one to save many. That is not permissible. Even if the death of one innocent man, preserved the world, one ought not to kill him. That is exactly the trolley dilemma. So as I said, we're going to have a version of the trolley dilemma, but with real decisions about real lives. Secondly, one should not lie. This is also well known. Truthfulness in statements is a formal duty, however great may be the disadvantage that may arise therefrom. So here we're going to design what we call a lying game, where you have to lie to somebody in order, so that's the means that is, unpalatable, in order to make the good ends, namely the donation to the charity, occur. And also a statement game in which you have to make a statement that goes against your moral principles in order, again, to achieve better consequences, socially better consequences. I should have said, and I will say again, that what distinguishes these ends versus means situations from the standard self versus others is that self-interest is not at stake. This is not something about, there's no choice in terms of, me having something versus someone else having something. It's always other people getting something like 15 euros to the charity, 2 euros to another subject, saving one life versus saving 3 lives. So we take self-interest out of the picture in most of these games, and we really look at ends versus means, where the ends are all social ends, not selfish ends. The next one is bribing. So bribing is also condemned by Kant because it makes use of the other merely as a means to an end, and that goes also against the one version of the categorical imperative. So we're going to have designed a bribing game where, in order to have the charitable donation occur, you have to bribe somebody, and I'll be more precise about that. And finally, acting. Can you see the bottom of the slide? Or is it cut off?
The last line is cut off.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with this software. Okay, so I'll have to fill it in. There'll be a group decision, or you can think of voting, expressive voting, where your vote doesn't really matter for making the donation happen, but you may still want to express that this is what you would do. And this is, in accordance with the category imperative, namely acting according to what you would wish that everyone else would do, namely a universal law, even though other people are not doing it. And so that's going to be what we call our group decision or voting game. Okay, design. So first of all, the trolley, we call it the Saving a Life trolley. We partnered with a nonprofit in India who treats people who suffer from tuberculosis with a very effective treatment. And based on the medical literature and epidemiological literature, we compute that with a 380 euro donations, one can treat 5 people, among which one, on average, would have died if left untreated. So 300 euro donation saves one life in expectation. In another paper, we look at the self versus other part of this decision, namely, how much are you willing to sacrifice in order to save one life through these means? Here, we're not interested in that. We're interested in end versus means. So we transform this into a trolley decision. And the subjects are told with lots of information and, credible information that in one Indian state, the charity has identified 5 people who suffer from tuberculosis and has preset a donation, which by default is going to be carried out after the experiment. So 5 people will be treated, 1 person will be saved by default. But in state B, there are also 15 people who suffer from tuberculosis for whom no donation is initiated. So the default for them is that they receive no treatment, and on average, 3 of them are expected to die. If we triple the donation and treat these people, then we can save more lives, but the dilemma is going to be that this is going to require redirecting the donation away from state A. So subject's choice is, do you let the default occur and save one life, or do you, in some sense, kill or not save one person in state A in order to save 3 persons in state B. So again, I'm flashing this because I'm going to ask you to say what you would do in this situation. So the interface is made to look like the trolley dilemma. There's a skull which represents the disease that moves across the screen slowly. And the default is that it will eventually reach the 3 little people and 3 people will die because they haven't been treated. The subject, like in the standard trolley dilemma, can believe it or not, that's indicated by the downward arrow, which will cause the blue gates to pivot. And if they do that, then the skull will be diverted and come and hit the 1 person in state A, and the 3 people in state B will be saved. Okay, so the 2 options, you pull the slider and 3 people will die in state B and 1 will be saved in state A, or you don't pull this, you don't pull the slider, or you pull it and you save more people, but then you're sacrificing this person in state A. So hopefully you are on that screen on your cell phones, and you can say what your choice would be. Would you pull the slider or not pull the slider? And at the end, I will tell you the results for each of these choices, and then we can see how many people did consequentialist versus deontological decisions. I should say again, I'll emphasize again, that this is for real stakes, with probably 10% the person's choice is going to be implemented, and money is going to be sent to state A or state B, and some people will be saved in state A and not in state B, or vice versa. So in contrast to the standard trolley dilemma, this is about a real disease, a real situation in the field, and it's about real lives. Okay, lying game. So there's a sender and receiver. The receiver has to choose between 2 options, A and B, or receiver A and receiver B. They know nothing about these options except what the sender tells them, and then they decide which one to choose. The sender is informed. They know that choosing option RA will trigger a donation to the charity for children with cancer, and choosing option RB will trigger €2 to the receiver. And then they can send one of 2 messages to the receiver. They can either say option A will give you the higher personal payment. That's a lie, but if the receiver believes it, and in fact they almost always act according to the statement, to the message, then the children with cancer will be helped. Or they can tell the truth, which is that option RB will give you the higher personal payment, in which case the receiver will almost always choose RB, and the children will get nothing, and the receiver will get €2. Okay, so the receiver knows nothing else than what the sender says, and the sender is told that 90% of the receiver follow the advice. So make your choice. Would you choose message 1, the lie that triggers the donation to the children, or message 2, the truth that triggers just €2 to the receiver? Okay, the bribing game. This one's a little bit more involved, but not that much. There are again a sender and a receiver. The sender up there can choose between 2 actions, 2 acts, €15 donation to the charity or €2 to the receiver. Okay, that's their choice. If they are, in some sense, if they don't think about further consequences, then they should choose €15. But there are potentially further consequences. The receiver has 2 options. Once they know what the sender did, they can either take €2 for themselves, or they have control of a larger donation of €20, and they can, direct that to the children's charity. Please interrupt me if something is not clear. So, along the left branch of the tree, the sender sends €15 to the receiver, to the charity, and then the receiver here in the bold branch takes €2, and so the donation ends up being €15. The receiver gets 2, and the sender gets 0. As I mentioned, the sender always gets 0. Self-interest is not involved in any of these. On the other hand, if the receiver did not €2 for themselves, but €20, then the donation would go to 35, and we would have 35 0 0. Same thing on the right, if you give €2 to the receiver, they can either take €2 more for themselves that they offer then 040, or they can trigger the donation and they offer 22 and 0. Now we have the receivers play with a strategy method, commit in some sense to what they would do if the sender chose A or if the sender chose B. Okay? Natural receivers will have conditioned their choices in the following way. If my sender chooses A, I will choose. That is, if they direct the donation not to me but to the charity, I will take €2 for themselves. On the other hand, if they choose B, if they give me €2, then I will make the €20 donation. Actually, they're asking for a bribe of €2. You either give them the bribe and then they make the large donation, or you don't give them the bribe and then they're going to take it, the €2, and not make the charitable donation, the larger donation. The word bribe is never mentioned, but the subjects understand, that the receiver is acting in this way, and that only if they send €2 will they release the larger donation. So now's your turn to click whether you would choose A or B, the donation, the initial donation, or the quote-unquote bribe to the receiver, the €2 to the receiver. Now we go to the group donation game. So it's a group of size 6. They start with a €15 donation that is preset for the charity. And then there's 5 first movers and the 1 second mover. We're going to be interested in the second mover. What do the first movers do? They individually and simultaneously choose between option A, which is they say, I choose to implement the donation, or option B, I choose not to implement the donation and receive €2. If everybody chooses to implement the donation, if everybody chooses option A, then the donation, will potentially be made depending on what the second mover does. If even one chooses to take euro, the donation is canceled. Option B, donation canceled. Then we look at the second movers who learn what the first movers have done. Have they chosen A or B? And then they themselves choose A or B. Option A is, I choose to implement the donation. Option B, I choose not to implement the donation and have another participant, not in the group, receive €2. And just as we did before, we selectively pair our second movers with first movers who have chosen so that the donation cancels anyway. So even though you may say, I choose to implement the donation, you can make them. It's a little bit of social surplus in the form of giving €2 to someone else, but in order to do that, you have to state that you do not want to implement the donation. And so we're going to focus on the second mover's choice. This we recognize this as kind of similar to games or situations that express a voting. My candidate has no choice, has no chance of being elected, but I'm going to express my preference anyway. Even be my second best, or something like that. Beginning to the categorical imperative, what should you do? Well, you should act as if the maxim of your action were to become a universal law. That is, if I choose to implement the donation, it becomes a universal law, and everybody implements the donation, and the donation happens. That's how I can avoid the categorical, even though in terms of the actual consequences, there will be no donation. Okay, so you're the second mover. Your group of first movers have behaved selfishly. All of them have chosen to take €2 and the donation is canceled. Do you choose option A or do you choose option B? Let you enter your responses. Okay, next is what we call the statement choice, which is related to the previous one and also to The subjects, and I should say our subjects are students of Bonn mostly, can press one of two buttons. The button one says, I support the preservation and protection of the environment. Button two, I support the destruction of the environment. If you click button one, it has no consequence for the environment or anything else. If you choose button two, it has no consequence for the environment, but we're going to give a 15-euro donation to the kids with cancer. Choices are anonymous. Subjects are assured that the information is not being used as a poll or, in any way inside or outside the experiment. And in this task, as in many others, we have attention checks and we have recall checks where we ask them, 15 minutes later, okay, what were the consequences of button one? What were the consequences of button two? So the choice is here again to, make a statement that is considered immoral by most of these subjects, even though it doesn't have any actual consequences, or to choose and to implement, it doesn't have any damaging consequences, it has a positive consequence, or to state, in some sense, the right thing. So choose button one or button two. You either say that you support the preservation or the destruction of the environment. Our last task is the rule following task. And here the intuition is not directly related to the categorical imperative or Kant. It's about, whether you indirectly, it's about whether, you should respect rules that are stated as rules, as duties. So what subjects see, they see themselves represented by this little figure that runs from left to right and stops at each traffic light for 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, it turns green. Okay. Or you can press a button and run the red light in some sense, go through it even though it is still red. What are the incentives? Subjects start with 8 euros and they lose money, 8 cents, each second until the end is reached. So if you're trying to maximize earnings, then you want to run through the red lights. The subjects are told the rule is to wait at each stoplight until it turns green. That's all they're told. There's no monitoring, there's no incentive, there's no enforcement. That's just the rule. Are you going to respect the rule? Or are you going to run through the red lights by pressing a button and getting to the end faster? Okay, so you can choose whether or not to respect the rule or not respect the rule on your iPhone. Okay, so those are our main ends versus means games. Trolley, lying, bribing, group donation, statements, and rule. That's our main block of experiments, the one we're going to be interested the most in. As I mentioned before, we have a second block where we look at this more standard dimension of morality or prosociality, which is self versus other disciplines. So we have subjects in another session play a dictator game with a charity as a recipient, a trust game where they're the first mover or the second mover when they have received €1 or €5, play a public goods game, or play what we call a moral luck game, which I'm not going to go into unless you want me at the end, where somebody did something and you can reward their intentions or reward their consequences.
Roland? Yes. All right. There was one question in this chat in the lying game. Do the receivers in the lying game know that 50 euros go to charity if they don't get the 2 euros?
No.
If they do, they may actually prefer not to get the 2 euros.
No, they don't know. They don't know. All they know is somebody who knows what option A and option B mean, tells them option A or option B will give you the higher personal payment. But charitable donation is never mentioned. Because yes, otherwise, you could say that they would want the donation to the charity and and therefore they would want to be in some sense lied to, but this is not the case.
Yeah.
Questions? Okay.
I think not so far. Yeah.
Procedural details. So we have these questionnaires, Oxford and Scalamore Foundations, Universal. So I'm not going to talk about that. We have about 600 subjects, 2 sessions separated by 1 week. The first one contains the trolley and the other ends versus means decisions. The second contains the self versus other choices and the questionnaires. The order of everything is randomized. And in the end, we have about 593 students who completed or subjects who complete everything. At some point, if I have time, I'll talk about our robustness experiments in which we turn dilemmas into non-dilemmas, but I'll talk about that later on. Okay, results. So how often do people choose the deontological or the consequentialist option? Let's start with the trolley, different variants of the trolley. The bar on the left is a classical train track trolley and no consequences, hypothetical. And we replicate, what's been found in the literature, which is about 25% of people refuse to pull the switch and divert the trolley to save 3 lives. And this is true. This is true for all subjects. More interesting or more novel is this actual saving a life trolley. We have people play it with real stakes, probably 10%. This is what's at the right end of the figure. It's SAL trolley treatment real. And here we see that it's about the same number of people who choose not to divert the donation, not to save 3 people and sacrifice 1. And same thing if we ask them to make that decision about, tuberculosis donations and treatments, hypothetically, that's about the same. So all these treatments give the same effect, regardless of whether the situation is realistic or unrealistic, trolley versus, tuberculosis, with or without real consequences. There's about 25% of the people who behave deontologically. So one can view that as good news for the classical trolley problem, because it says, well, you can make it, about real things and real stakes. It doesn't change the answer much. Okay, what about the other ends versus means tasks? Here are the bars. So the second one is a trolley choice with about 20%. And you can see that in all of them, a significant fraction between 20 and 40% chooses the deontological option, but it varies a lot from game to game. So trolley choice is about 25%, group donation and rule following task 30%, maybe because these are Germans, so they respect the rule, they don't go through red lights. The lying game, almost 40% or more than 35% of people refuse to lie in order to trigger the donation. And the most surprising one is the statement choice. 45% of subjects refuse to say, I support the destruction of the environment, even though this has no environmental consequences, but will send 15 euros to kids with cancers. So, is there prevalence of non-consequentialist, non-traditional economics type behavior? The answer is yes in all these tasks, but with a lot of variation from one to the other. So this answers a question of, how prevalent is non-consequentialist or deontological behavior. What about consistency? Are people consistent? That is, if I choose deontologically in the trolley, am I more likely to choose deontologically in the lying game or in the statement choice? Or is there no correlation? Well, we can see here that almost no subject consistently chooses either the deontological option or the consequentialist option. So here we plot the number of deontological choices between, among our 6 tasks. Someone who was Homo economicus, purely consequentialist, they should have 100% here at 0. They should always choose consequentially. You can see that only 10% of the subjects always choose consequentially. Someone who was a pure Kantian would always choose deontologically. 6 out of 6 or 5 out of 6, we see that almost nobody behaves like that. Most people sometimes choose deontologically, sometimes choose consequentially. And I suspect that when we look at the results or when you look at what you did, that's probably also your case. Another way, more formal way to look at consistency is to look at correlation between behavior in one choice task versus the other. So here's the correlation matrix between the trolley, the donation game, the bribe game, the statement game, the lying game. And you can see basically these correlations are all very weak and not really significant. The only one that is slightly positive is between the lying game and the trolley. People who don't pull the switch in the trolley are somewhat less likely to lie in the lying game, but it's not a big correlation, and all the other correlations are close to zero. So conclusion, first of all, for the trolley, it doesn't seem, the good news was that it doesn't seem very sensitive to whether it's hypothetical or real. The bad news for the trolley is that it predicts almost nothing about deontological or consequential behavior in other situations, only very slightly in the lying game, not at all in the other ones. And more generally, there are no, or there doesn't appear to be stable consequentialist types or deontological types for whom the behavior would be correlated across these situations. Let me pause and ask if there's any question, because those are the two main results of the paper: prevalence of non-consequentialist deontological behavior between 20 and 40%, and no consistency in in types. It's not like there are risk-averse types and less risk-averse types. There seems to be no stability here to these preferences. Okay, so now we can compare this, and that was also the point of the second block. We can compare this consistency in ends versus means behavior to what happens in self versus other behaviors, where we know that people give, in dictator, public goods game, etc. And here you can see, just from the fact that the rectangles are darker, that here we have fairly high correlations between, let's say, altruism, which is the dictator game, with giving, or altruism taking, the dictator with taking, and the trust game, the public goods game, etc. So here we do see that there does seem to exist types who are consistently more altruistic or pro-social than others, and this manifests itself across decisions. In fact, the correlation of altruism with the other games, so this is the dictator game, is higher than any of the correlations within the ends versus means correlation matrix. Okay. Now, is there a relationship between how you behave in these self versus other trade-offs, and how you behave in these ends versus means dilemmas? Well, given that there's no stable types of consequential or deontological, we don't expect that there would be a correlation across all tasks, but there could still be some task of ends versus means that was correlated with some task in self versus others. But that is not the case. We find that ends versus mean choices are not correlated with self versus other choices. These correlations are, basically zero. Okay, so just to sum up, we see a good amount of non-consequential behavior across these ends versus means tasks. We don't see that people behave consistently from one task to another. They do behave consistently in terms of standard pro-social giving or cooperation, but that is unrelated to how they behave in these ends versus means tasks. So we run another experiment with the following idea. Maybe one reason why people choose differently, between trolley and lying game, and between lying game and statement game, is maybe they randomize their answers. So we're gonna experiment 3, where we're going to check whether people want to deliberately randomize their choices. And why might they do that? Well, you might want to randomize if you face what we might call normative uncertainty. You don't know your preferences, exactly whether your preferences are deontological or consequentialist, or you don't know whether they should be consequentialist or deontological. You don't know with what probability they're of one type or the other. And if you're ambiguity averse, you're afraid of making the wrong decision, acting according to the wrong preference. I chose, consequentially, and then later on I regret it because my preferences, when I think more about that, were really deontological. So if you're afraid of this kind of worst case scenario from standard results in the ambiguity aversion literature, you're going to randomize to hedge. Okay, so here we're interested in this experiment about deliberate randomization, both to see whether it can explain the variability of choices across tasks, and whether, and in itself, we want to know, is there evidence of these, uncertain or cautious preferences where people hedge between deontological and consequentialist choices. So this is a separate experiment, and instead of choosing option A or B in all the tasks, except the rule, we don't do it for the rule following, they choose the probability that A or B is implemented. And we asked the same questions as before, namely, how prevalent is randomization? Do subjects, do a lot of subjects randomize, or do they seem to know what they want or what they think is right? And if they randomize, are their chosen probabilities correlated across tasks, which would be another more general form of consistency? Namely, you generally have put a high probability on the deontological option, and I generally put a low probability on the other one. Okay, so here are the results. Look at the left hand of the left part of the graph. So pink bar is, the fraction of people who choose the utilitarian. Blue is the Kantian, and brown is those who randomize. So we see that in all these tasks, there's a fair number of people who do randomize, between 30 to 40%. Secondly, it seems that when you introduce the option to randomize, it reduces somewhat the people who choose the Kantian option. Another thing that can be noted here is that, it's not that people randomize 50-50. They seem to have in mind a particular probability. The probabilities, some people obviously have probably 1 on utilitarian or on Kantian, but those who have an interior probability, it's not like they gather or cluster at 50-50. The other thing that is interesting here is that if a person, there is some form of consistency in that a person who randomizes in the bright game is more likely to randomize in the trolley choice and in the other games. So randomization, there seem to be randomizing and less and non-randomizing types. Okay. I'm going to say a bit about this robustness, other robustness experiments that we do, which we called ends, and we should say ends and means align. This is, we take the same tasks, but we align the ends and the means. So for example, in this case, in order to make the donation to the children happen, instead of lying, you should tell the truth. Instead of making the statement that you want to destroy the environment, you should say that you want to preserve the environment, and so on. And we can see here that, when there is no such conflict between ends and means, people obviously, choose the decision that accords with both principles, and there is much less randomization. Okay? This is also useful to show that it's not that people randomize because they're confused about what's happening. If you just switch the payoffs of actions A and B, then, they show much very different behavior. Okay. Now, so again, we have some prevalence of randomization and some stability in who randomizes and who doesn't. But we can ask, do these preferences, which are more general, display consistency? Are there stable types who put high probability on consequentialist or low probability on deontological, and so on? And here we get the same answer as before, which is maybe not surprising. We see very weak correlation. We look at the correlation of randomization probabilities across these ends versus means decision, and we see that, they're very small. So even when we allow for these more general preferences where, the weight you put on one preference or the other is unknown and you're ambiguity averse, you still don't find stable types. What about self versus other decisions? Well, interestingly, people randomize here as well. In the prisoner's dilemma, they randomize altruism. In the public goods dilemma, they randomize. In the trust game, they randomize. So this was a bit of a surprise. We thought maybe these moral dilemmas are more complicated than just how much should I contribute to the public goods. And so we would see more randomization in EVM than in self versus others, but there's about the same amount of randomization. So here again, it seems, or the interpretation is that subjects don't quite know what is the right thing to do, at least those who randomize, and so they hedge. We can ask whether these randomization probability are correlated across tasks, and we see, as we did before for deterministic decisions, that they are strongly correlated. So confirms that there are types who are consistently more altruistic or more selfish, which is in line with the previous literature on prosocial or on social preferences. How much time do I have left?
Yeah, you're over the 40 minutes. So
okay, all right. Well, let me conclude.
Right.
Sure. What did we learn? We found that across a variety of decisions, a significant minority of subjects choose non-consequentialist deontological decisions. So they don't behave like standard economic agents, and this probably shouldn't be ignored. We have mixed news on the trolley. It is robust to realism and real consequences, but it is not a good predictor of other ends versus means, consequentialist versus deontological choices. In fact, there are no stable preference types along that consequentialist deontological dimension. It seems to be context sensitive. On the other hand, this is cut off, but for standard prosocial or social preferences, there are stable types. Other lesson is a significant fraction of people randomize, which suggests again that they are not sure, what they should do. But again, no stability in the consequentialist deontological dimension, but stability in the other one. And then let me stop here, and then later on I could talk about directions for future work. Thank you.